guys, welcome back to releasethecraftin. Priscilla here with another episode of Storycraft. And since we are still in the month of November, we are in the middle of Poevember. And you guys, I have another great one to tell you. If you've read the title, you already know where we're going. Today, I'm going to words are really hard already up the top. I'm going to tell you guys the story of The Telltale Heart. And this is another short story by our partner in crime, let's say, Edgar Allan Poe, and it's great. I have some strong thoughts and feelings about it, which I will get into at the end, because I am so excited to jump into this story that we're just going to jump into it. We're going to jump into it right now. And I don't really have that much to add up top, except that this story was published in 1843 in a publishing called The Pioneer, and I don't know what that is, but that's when it was published, and it was only a couple years before he died. It was 6 years before he died. So a lot of his work, you'll find, was published in those last couple of years, and this is no exception. It's sort of when he did his best work, which is interesting but also sad. But at any rate, without further ado, Edgar Allan Poe's The Telltale Heart. True. Nervous. Very, very dreadfully nervous. I had been and am. But why will you say that I am mad? The disease had sharpened my senses, not destroyed, not dulled them. Above all was the sense of hearing acute. I heard all things in the heaven and in the earth. I heard many things in hell. How then am I mad? Hearken and observe how healthily, how calmly I can tell you the whole story. It is impossible to say how first the idea entered my brain, but once conceived, it haunted me day and night. Object there was none. Passion there was none. I loved the old man. He had never wronged me. He had never given me insult. For his gold I had no desire. I think it was his eye. Yes, it was this. He had the eye of a vulture, a pale blue eye with a film over it. Whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold. And so by degrees, very gradually, I made up my mind to take the life of the old man and thus rid myself of the eye forever. Now this is the point. You fancy me mad. Madmen know nothing. But you should have seen me. You should have seen how wisely I proceeded, and with what caution, with what foresight, with what dissimulation I went to work. I was never kinder to the old man than during the whole week before I killed him. And every night, about midnight, I turned the latch of his door and opened it, oh so gently. And then, when I had made an opening sufficient for my head, I put in a dark lantern, all closed, that no light shone out. And then I thrust in my head. Oh, you would have laughed to see how cunningly I thrust it in. I moved it slowly, very, very slowly, so that I might not disturb the old man's sleep. It took me an hour to place my whole head within the opening so far that I could see him as he lay upon his bed. Ha! Would a madman have been so wise as this? And then, when my head was well in the room, I undid the lantern cautiously. Oh, so cautiously, for the hinges creaked. I undid it just so much that a single thin ray fell upon the vulture eye. And this I did for 7 long nights, every night just at midnight. But I find the eye was always closed, and so it was impossible to do the work, for it was not the old man who vexed me, but his evil eye. And every morning, when the day broke, I went boldly into the chamber and spoke courageously to him, calling him by name in a hearty tone and inquiring how he had passed the night. So you see, he would have been a very profound old man indeed to suspect that every night, just at 12, I looked in upon him while he slept. Upon the 8th night, I was more than usually cautious in opening the door. A watch's minute hand moves more quickly than mine did. Never before that night had I felt the extent of my own powers, of my sagacity. I could scarcely contain my feelings of triumph, to think that there I was, opening the door, little by little, and he not even to dream of my secret deeds or thoughts. I fairly chuckled at the idea, and perhaps he heard me, for he moved on the bed suddenly, as if startled. Now you may think that I drew back, but no. His room was as black as pitch, with the thick darkness, for the shutters were closed, fastened through fear of robbers, and so I knew that he could not see the opening of the door, and I kept pushing it on steadily. I had my head in and was about to open the lantern when my thumb slipped upon the tin fastening, and the old man sprang up in bed, crying out, "Who's there?" I kept quite still and said nothing. For a whole hour I did not move a muscle, and in the meantime I did not hear him lie down. He was still sitting up in the bed, listening, just as I have done, night after night, hearkening to the death watches in the wall. Presently, I heard a slight groan, and I knew it was the groan of mortal terror. It was not a groan of pain or of grief. Oh, no! It was the low, stifled sound that arises from the bottom of the soul when overcharged with awe. I knew the sound well. Many a night, just at midnight, when all the world slept, it has welled up from my own bosom, deepening with its dreadful echo the terrors that distracted me. I say I knew it well. I knew what the old man felt, and I pitied him. Although I chuckled at heart, I knew that he had been lying awake ever since the first slight noise, when he had turned in the bed. His fears had been ever since growing upon him. He had been trying to fancy them causeless, but could not. He had been saying to himself, "It is nothing but the wind in the chimney. It is only a mouse crossing the floor, or it is merely a cricket which has made a single chirp." Yes, he had been trying to comfort himself with these suppositions, but he had found it all in vain, because death, in approaching him, had stalked with his black shadow before him and enveloped the victim. It was the mournful influence of the unperceived shadow that caused him to feel, although he neither saw nor heard, to feel the presence of my head within the room. When I had waited a long time, very patiently, without hearing him lie down, I resolved to open a very, very little crevice in the lantern. So I opened it. You cannot imagine how stealthily, until at length a simple, dim ray, like the thread of a spider, shot out from the crevice and fell full upon the vulture eye. It was open, wide open, and I grew furious as I gazed upon it. I saw it with perfect distinctness, all a dull blue with a hideous veil over it that chilled the very marrow in my bones. But I could see nothing else of the old man's face or person, for I had directed the ray, as if by instinct, precisely upon the damned spot. And have I not told you that what you mistake for madness is but over-acuteness of the sense? Now I say, there came to my ears a low, dull, quick sound, such as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I knew that sound well, too. It was the beating of the old man's heart. It increased my fury as the beating of a drum stimulates the soldier into courage. But even yet, I refrained and kept still. I scarcely breathed. I held the lantern motionless. I tried how steadily I could maintain the ray upon the eye. Meantime, the hellish tattoo of the heart increased. It grew quicker and quicker and louder every instant. The old man's terror must have been extreme. It grew louder, I say louder, every moment. Do you mark me well? I have told you that I am nervous. So I am. And now at the dead hour of the night, amid the dreadful silence of that old house, so strange a noise as this excited me to uncontrollable terror. Yet for some minutes longer I refrained and stood still, but the beating grew louder. I thought the heart must burst, and now a new anxiety seized me. The sound would be heard by a neighbor. The old man's hour had come. With a loud yell, I threw open the lantern and leaped into the room. He shrieked once only. In an instant, I dragged him to the floor and pulled the heavy bed over him. I then smiled gaily to find the deed so far done. But for many minutes the heart beat on with a muffled sound. This, however, did not vex me. It would not be heard through the wall, and at length it ceased. The old man was dead. I removed the bed and examined the corpse. Yes, he was stone dead. I placed my hand upon the heart and held it there many minutes. There was no pulsation. He was stone dead. His eye would trouble me no more. If you still think me mad, you will think so no longer when I describe the wise precautions I took for the concealment of the body. The night waned, and I worked hastily, but in silence. First of all, I dismembered the corpse. I cut off the head and the arms and the legs. I then took up 3 planks from the flooring of the chamber and deposited all between the scantlings. I then replaced the boards so cleverly, so cunningly, that no human eye, not even his, could have detected anything wrong. There was nothing to wash out, no stain of any kind, no blood spot whatever. I had been too wary for that. A tub had caught all. Ha! Ha! When I had made an end of these labors, it was 4 o'clock, still dark as midnight. As the bell sounded the hour, there came a knocking at the street door. I went down to open it with a light heart, for what now had I to fear? There entered 3 men who introduced themselves, with perfect suavity, as officers of the police. A shriek had been heard by a neighbor during the night. Suspicion of foul play had been aroused. Information had been lodged at the police office, and they, the officers, had been deputed to search the premises. I smiled. For what had I to fear? I bade the gentleman welcome. The shriek, I said, was my own, in a dream. The old man I mentioned was absent in the country. I took my visitors all over the house. I bade them search, and search well. I led them at length to his chamber. I showed them his treasures, secure, undisturbed. In the enthusiasm of my confidence, I brought chairs into the room, and desired them here to rest from their fatigues, while I myself, in the wild audacity of my perfect triumph, placed my own seat upon the very spot beneath which reposed the corpse of the victim. The officers were satisfied. My manner had convinced them. I was singularly at ease. They sat, and, while I answered cheerily, they chatted of familiar things. But ere long, I felt myself getting pale and wished them gone. My head ached, and I fancied a ringing in my ears. But still they sat and still chatted. The ringing became more distinct. It continued and became more distinct. I talked more freely to get rid of the feeling, but it continued and gained definiteness. Until at length, I found that the noise was not within my ears. No doubt I now grew very pale, but I talked more fluently and with a heightened voice, yet the sound increased, and what could I do? It was a low, dull, quick sound, much such a sound as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I gasped for breath, and yet the officers heard it not. I talked more quickly, more vehemently, but the noises steadily increased. I rose and argued about trifles in a high key with violent gesticulations, but the noise steadily increased. Why would they not be gone? I paced the floor to and fro with heavy strides, as if excited by fury by the observations of the men. But the noise steadily increased. Oh God, what could I do? I foamed, I raved, I swore. I swung the chair upon which I had been sitting, and it grated upon the boards, but the noise arose over all and continually increased. It grew louder, 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 and still the men chatted pleasantly and smiled. Was it possible they heard not? Almighty God, no. No, they heard, they suspected, they knew. They were making a mockery of my horror. This I thought, and this I think. But anything was better than this agony. Anything was more tolerable than this derision. I could bear those hypocritical smiles no longer. I felt that I must scream or die. And now again, hark! Louder, louder, louder. Villains, I shrieked. Dissemble no more. I admit the deed. Tear up the planks. Here it is, the beating of his hideous heart. The end. So yeah, you guys, thank you for listening to the entirety of The Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe, as read by me. What I wanted to say about this story is that if you have ever done a little bit of a YouTube search, you can actually hear this story and a couple other of Edgar's stories read by Christopher Lee, who reads it brilliantly. And I wish I could read it that well. But something about this story, like reading it aloud, necessitates the need for camp. You have to be campy to read this story, and I absolutely relish the idea of getting to ham it up a little bit to play the role, so to speak, and read this story. So this story was a delight. I was absolutely tickled to read this and was looking forward to reading it all month, so I had to choose a day where I was feeling particularly energetic to give you the performance I feel like you guys deserve. Hopefully I did it justice. I don't think I'm on the same level as Christopher Lee. I don't think anybody is, but I do think that if you enjoyed listening to my version, you'll really enjoy his version. But this story is really fun to read, you guys, just like on principle. And it is another of the stories that Poe has where the narrator is not only unreliable, but also the villain. And I kind of love that aspect. I love getting stories from that perspective. But this one in particular really, really sticks with you. It's a very popular story. And I think what makes this interesting is that the narrator himself tries so hard to convince you that he's not crazy, but he admits that there is something wrong with him in the beginning of the story. It's like one of the first lines of the story where he says that he has a sickness, but people think that he's like mentally unstable because of his sickness. But it's actually just heightened his senses. So that's the problem, is that he has very acute senses, and that makes him seem a little extreme, but he's not crazy. He's not sick. He's just very aware, hyper aware. And it makes me wonder what disease Poe had in mind that would cause this. The first one that came to my mind was probably syphilis. If you've like looked at anybody in this sort of context who has syphilis at this time, like a lot of crazy things are happening, and it does kind of rot your brain a little bit untreated, but it could be anything. It really honestly could be anything. That was just the first one. I think it brings to mind a lot of things. So that's why syphilis came to the forefront first, but it could be anything. It could just be like miasma, knowing the 1800s. But I am very intrigued with the fact that the narrator himself admits that he has some kind of problem going into this, and seems to be in a position of being like a caretaker for the old man, but is so overwhelmed by his quote unquote heightened senses that he can no longer stand the old man's eye, and then begins to hear sounds that aren't even there. And you could say it was his guilt, or you could just say it's the madness. Who knows? But this is a fantastic story by Poe. I think it definitely gets across everything it meant to get across to begin with. And like I said, it's just so fun to read. If you have never like read this story out loud, I would say look it up and just read it a little bit by yourself. You will find yourself in the campiest way reading the words from this, and it is the best. It is the best thing ever. It's just a really fun experience. So I definitely recommend it if you have not tried. But I love this story. It's just a fun one to tell. Out of all of his stories, some of them are like, a lot of them are great. All of them are great. Not all of them. Most of them are great. But I think it's one of the more fun stories to sort of play with. And it's not a particular narrative that you get, especially in older literature like this. Not a lot of them were writing about being a murderer from the murderer's perspective. And yeah, he did that. So I love that. And, thanks, Edgar, for writing a story that I think is a banger of a good time. And yeah, that's it. Now I'm just going to ramble. So I'm going to jump off here. I hope that you guys enjoyed the story. I hope that you are enjoying our month of Poevember. I don't remember if I talked about it here. I think maybe I have a little bit. I mentioned it a little bit. I talked about it more in detail on my Patreon, but I do want to bring Poevember back next year as sort of a community challenge, because I think that would be really fun. Making these like sort of spooky gothic themed crafts is always fun. Like, that's always a good place to be. It's my particular wheelhouse, but I also really enjoyed making them specifically for this. And I also got to make a lot of really fun digitals for my patrons over on Patreon, and you guys can check that out if you're interested in picking those up. I also added them to the Patreon shop, so if you don't want to join the Patreon but you would like to get the digitals from this month, they are available in my Patreon shop, because Patreon has a shop now. Did you guys know that? I didn't know that. I just found out recently. So I started adding stuff there, and I think I will add some more stuff there as time goes on, like some of the previous rewards for people who may not necessarily want to be a patron but want to pick up the stuff that is being offered to the patrons. I think I will do that at a later point. I'll add more stuff there, but right now the Poevember stuff is in there because I'm going to use it, I think, in the next video. So I wanted it to be available so that you guys could also get it too if you would like to. And maybe at some point I'll add it to my Etsy store, but that's a whole can of worms I'm not really particularly interested in at this point in time. I will talk about that at a later point in time. And what else did I want to tell you guys? As of the time of this recording, so this week, which is a Thanksgiving week of November in 2023, I will be collaborating with Joy at The Wild Historian. She was formerly Witch Mooncraft, so if you've heard me talk about her before, we're going to be doing a collaboration at the end of this week on Instagram, so definitely check that out if you're not following me on Instagram already. just skip over there so that you don't miss out on our little Poevember collaboration that's happening. Yeah, that's good. That's definitely now going to be it for me, guys. I think that's all the old business and new business I have to share with you at this moment. Like I said, I am still doing my little time off, but this has been a very fun time off. So doing these like random crafts and just sort of dwelling in this Poevember has been a very fun time. So I appreciate your faces, guys, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Until then, happy crafting. Bye.